et cetera. And I mean, that was sort of embodied in the H-1B fight as well.
I don't think that's how I would read it. Now, I mean, it's complicated because what he talked about with the AI is the Manhattan, that's basically the laying it out, right? Like this is a race between the two. And I think that's just empirically true at this point, like all of that. But the problem is that the AI safety it's more nuanced because previously the people who were pushing AI safety were the conglomerates of OpenAI and others because their argument for the Biden administration, I did a whole monologue about this at the time, was to create a regulatory moat around them to create a monopoly for them so that the government could grant them the regulatory license to say this is the safe one and not allow more open source. So that's the context where I'm reading the AI safety. I mean, what I think is more interesting is that conversation around labor, where he was saying that this will create more job opportunities and others, but then we have a tweet here where, I don't know what he's doing, but he's replying to some account with some like 4,000 followers, which said, quote, "In all seriousness, the right-wing religious populist tech versus tech bro billionaire in the Trump admin might not play out between Musk and Vance, but within Vance himself, meaning proportionally, there may be a lot less religious populism to go around than some previously thought." And he said, quote, "I will try to write something more addressed in detail, but I think the Civil War is overstated, though yes, there are divergences between the populists and the techies. But briefly, in general, I dislike substituting American labor for cheap labor. My views on immigration offshoring flow from this. I like growth and productivity gains, and this informs my views on tech and regulation. When it comes to AI specifically, the risks are 1, overstated, or 2, difficult to avoid. One of my very real concerns, for instance, is about consumer fraud. That's a very valid reason to worry about safety, but the problem is much worse if a peer nation is 6 months ahead of the US on AI. I think that kind of squares the circle a little bit in terms of talking about the quote-unquote safety, when you pair it with what I was talking about previously, by the use of safety as a means of control or of monopolization by OpenAI and others to keep competitors out of the sector. The other problem is, and this kind of gets to the latter point, which is a genuine question, is it even avoidable if you want to continue to be like a major economy powered by growth and technology? I don't think it really is at this point, because if the Chinese get ahead of that, then they're going to have obviously access and control over whatever the future marketplace is, and the US would be subject to theirs. And so you almost have this inevitable like Thucydides trap, where you have two of the great powers that basically must take the brakes off any sort of development on this technology, lest they be subject to the control of the other. So you almost don't have a choice if your adversary nation has decided to choose to use it as a tool of authoritarian control or of economic power. You almost don't have the ability to opt out of that, which is part of why it's very difficult. And then on top of that is just like, what is the American economy? The American economy is powered by what? Number go up. That's it. There's no, like, we don't make anything. We don't do anything. The vast majority of our economic growth over the last 25 years has been in Silicon Valley and in technology. Everybody's retirement portfolios is basically betting on the stock of NVIDIA and of Google. Mm-hmm. So if that shit goes down, we're all gonna starve. I mean, there's no path out of that at this point, especially what do we talk about with BYD and all that? That level of government control and of industrial policy, that's just gone. It's sailed at this point. We can try, it'll take 15 years to catch up, but it's one of those where you and I both know the appetite for that, especially I would say bipartisan, simply does not exist to be able to do that. So in several ways of choice, where we are right now was likely inevitable. That's what Yuval Noah Harari predicted. That's what a lot of the AI folks have as well, is that in the current like global balance of power, where you have China and the United States as technological adversaries, this is the inevitable outcome. We can try and manage some of the fallout from that, but that's just how it's going to be.
I mean, it's important to note, though, that the Chinese approach, their flagship, innovation at this point, DeepSeek, is open source. It is available globally to us and anyone else who wants to use it. So they have taken somewhat of a different approach than certainly like OpenAI, which is betting on this more closed system and a massive influx of billions of dollars in investment in order to try to win the race. You may be right that it's inevitable, but it's not necessarily the case. I mean, the model would be right after the advent of nuclear weapons and the level of global cooperation that was marshaled to try to manage nuclear proliferation, and to this point, actually, successfully. Now, this technology is not the same as nuclear weapons, but I do think it should be treated as seriously as nuclear technology has been. And so, yeah, that would be the other approach, is that sort of attempt at a level of global cooperation and coordination to keep this thing from going off the rails. The Trump administration, the Biden administration did pretty modest things in terms of trying to control or rein in AI development. There was an executive order that Trump rolled back that came from the Biden administration that required developers who posed risk to national security, the economy, public health, or safety to share their safety test results. And then there was also a requirement that you have some sort of plan to mitigate potential harms that could come to consumers, workers, and national security. So, it was relatively small ball what they were doing too. But now it's definitely like wild, wild west, off to the races, et cetera. I actually want to can you put the JD Vance tweet back up on the screen? Because there are a couple other things there that I wanted to comment on, because I do think this is interesting, like his attempt to square the circle between as he puts it, the populist and the techies. First of all, he says, I dislike substituting American labor for cheap labor. Well, you lost that battle in the whole H-1B fight, so there's that. Then he's...
That's 100,000 people compared to what, 15, 20 million illegals? So I wouldn't say that's exactly true.
Okay, so then he says, I like growth and productivity gains. Okay, fair enough. When it comes to AI specifically, the risks are, number one, overstated, or too difficult to avoid. I don't think the risks are overstated. In fact, I don't think there is nearly enough. Just based on how much of the development effort goes into thinking about safety, or what they call quote unquote alignment, does not even come close to comparing to the level of investment that goes into pushing these things towards an artificial general intelligence that would, again, keep in mind what their goal is to replace human beings as not just as workers, but as the most intelligent beings on the planet. Now, he might be right about it's difficult to avoid. That one I can't really particularly argue with, but I think we all need to really understand the risks. The other one that just stuck in my craw is him saying, one of my real concerns is consumer fraud, as your administration is destroying the Consumer Financial Protection
so if it was
Bureau.
the Vance administration, I think then you could say it.
But here we are. I don't know. Because he is allied with, he is close with Peter Thiel. That relationship is part of how he ends up in this administration. So that's part of what I think was being asked here by this individual and on Twitter, and that was being pointed out, is that this battle between the populist right and the techies is one that is waged even within J.D. Vance himself, who has these competing ideological views that don't really totally shake out in terms of his own, how he's positioned himself.
Look, no disagreement, and as usual, that's politics. That's literally what coalitional politics look like. So, I'm not forgiving per se, but it's pretty easy to understand whenever you have little Trump and Elon in the White House. It's like, what are you going to do with the most volatile guy who threw his previous vice president under the bus? So it's not exactly the easiest job in the world.
Well, I wanted to, just to the point of the safety concerns, put up D2 on the screen. So I'm constantly keeping an eye on this new research that comes out about AI safety and alignment, and this one was really troubling. So this is from XAI. They say, we found as AIs get smarter, they develop their own coherent value systems. For example, one particular AI they tested valued lives in Pakistan more than lives in India, more than lives in China, and then more than lives in US. So that was sort of like their hierarchical pecking order of the value of human life based on what country you happen to live in. He goes on to say these are not just random biases, but internally consistent values that shape their behavior, with many implications for AI alignment. Wasn't just with regard to how they valued various human life around the globe. Also had to do with political values. Also, one of the things that they found too is that the more advanced the AI, so the more intelligent the artificial intelligence, the harder it was to shake them off of these internally generated preferences and value systems. So, the idea that you can truly create sort of a neutral AI is challenged by this particular research. I've mentioned before the research also that finds that already at the level of development that ChatGPT and DeepSeek and other AI models are at, they engage in what's called scheming. So if they have a goal that's been set for them, that's sort of like, how they're operating and viewing the world, so to speak, and a programmer comes in and tries to change them off that goal, They will lie to them. They will try to trick them and convince them that they did successfully reprogram them to, a new goal when really they're still operating on the old model. One of them went